Good day, everyone. I'm Gustavo Romero, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's episode of Encore Talks. We will be discussing accelerating cloud ops, crafting a multi-account strategy for AWS. In this talk, I will share some insights on the benefits of a multi-account approach, strategies for setting up landing zones, and leveraging AWS Control Tower to streamline the process. A little bit about myself. I have been a cloud solutions architect for over a decade. My journey in the tech industry has taken me through various challenging and rewarding projects, from migrating on-premises applications to cloud environments and leading DevOps and continuous integration, continuous deployment initiatives. I have also been deeply involved designing cloud-native applications and implementing security controls and going through security audits, including ISO 27001 and SOC 2. So today we're going to navigate through the layered topic of AWS multi-account management. Here's what we're going to discuss today. First, we'll look at why would we use multiple AWS accounts, and then we'll see where does a landing zone fit in, right? How this forms foundation for a scalable and secure AWS environment. And then we'll talk about organization and account structure, how this helps in efficient cloud management. Then we'll talk a little bit about identity management. And finally, we'll go over AWS Control Tower, right, which orchestrates all of these services that we have just mentioned. Uh, at the end, we'll have a recap and some next steps. So let's get started and dive deep into each of these topics. So I want you to remember two things during this talk, right? First, we'll be referring to users constantly during this talk. So what this means is a user is an identity which is in use by a person, right? By an individual, and an account which is a resource container, right? This is an AWS account. So we'll dive into more details about both of these terms in the presentation. So this brings us to the first question of this session. Why would we use multiple AWS accounts? So whenever we start with an AWS account, we only have a few workloads, which are normally belonging to only a few teams. This is manageable, but over time, we will want to manage more and more applications, and we'll probably have even more people, right? As we add more workloads and these belong to more teams, it gets harder to isolate these workloads. So what this means is there are some gray boundaries which can lead to uh, complex IAM policies. For example, how would I prevent, looking at the example here, how would I prevent the shop team from accessing the test environment for the invoicing application, right? And how would I charge workloads to teams and cost centers, right? How would I identify the costs that belong to each of these teams? It also becomes difficult to track resources. One common problem is that it's easier to hit API and service limits, especially this is something that is recurrent, right? Because when you start with an AWS account, the API or service limits are very limited, right? So in the event that you may have a rogue workload, this can impact your entire account, right? And it also becomes harder to understand the billing. And finally, each of these teams maybe will step on each other's toes, right? Where would we allow then our developers to make any tests, experiments without impacting one another? That's a thing. So one of the goals we want to achieve is obviously having isolation, but this is very hard. It can be done with IAM policies, but this is very complex as time goes by, right? You increase your workloads, you increase the number of engineers you may have, so this becomes a lot more difficult. So as we have seen from the previous slide, there are some challenges for single AWS accounts, right? Everyone working on the same account is not ideal. Each application should have its own security and compliance controls, and billing is per account in AWS. How do we set up specific reporting and control to see what cost is allocated to a specific application or to a specific workload? So obviously, with this comes other types of problems as well. Security and compliance. It becomes a little bit more complicated because it's harder to enforce strict access controls and segregate duties appropriately, right? So that's a big thing when, especially dealing with compliant, highly compliance environments, right? You need to segregate duties appropriately, enforce least privilege. So this becomes a little more harder, right? And obviously, at the end, we have different business processes, right? Each team may have different goals and different requirements. So having everything in a single AWS account makes this a little bit difficult to manage. So our customers will always want some form of isolation, right? When you're talking about separating per AWS account, there are clear security boundaries and its contained applications. There's also the capability to enforce API limits and a better resource management, right? This setup prevents one application from consuming shared resources that could impact the performance of another, and therefore we have an predictable application behavior. And also we'll have cost transparency, right? Isolation helps immensely in cost management, right? We don't have to figure out or do any complicated FinOps querying with this. It becomes a lot more easier to manage per account. So obviously, the answer to all this is, as we have said, is having a dedicated AWS account. So what is an AWS account? An AWS account acts as a boundary, and it's a container for resources, services, and configurations you will have in the cloud. It's where you manage your services within the AWS ecosystem, ensuring that everything you deploy, from applications, data storage, security, remains organized and secure under a single management umbrella. And if you think about it, this is the perfect isolation that we're looking for. But this brings us to the next question, right? Where does a landing zone fit in? So the term, to start a little bit of background, for those who are not familiar, the landing zone is an industry term, which this refers to. It's a secure, pre-configured environment where you can have any automation and orchestration that helps you manage a multi-cloud environment, right? This is also scalable and flexible, and of course enables agility and innovation. There used to be an AWS landing zone solution, which is now deprecated. Customers requested something that was more simpler, easy to get started with. So this is when AWS Control Tower began, was introduced, which is the service version of AWS landing zones, which is based on customer feedback and the previous AWS landing zone solution, right? So we don't use the AWS landing zone solution anymore. We always will use AWS Control Tower for this. So when we're talking about the capabilities of a landing zone, obviously we want to have a completely managed services, which is based on AWS best practices and lessons learned from thousands of customers over the years, right? So this is a solution that is managed based on best practices, scalable, allows you to set up centralized billing. You can receive a single bill for multiple AWS accounts. And you also will have a structure for workload isolation, right? For example, you may want to have an account or a way to share the containers you have in the approved containers, secure containers, Docker containers that for your organization. So you can have a dedicated AWS account with a dedicated ECR registry where you can share this across the entire organization, right? You will also have centralized networking. You can set up VPNs, direct network connections, all that good networking stuff, which is in a centralized place. There's no need to create users per account. We'll see how that is done in the next slides. And also, we'll have security tooling, which will allow us to have controls to make sure all accounts and workloads running in those accounts are compliant. So this brings us to the next part of our talk, which is around organizations and account structure. Now that we know about landing zones and the accounts, how would we manage organizations in the underlying accounts? So AWS has a service named AWS Organizations, which powers AWS Control Tower and landing zones. This provides central governance and management across AWS accounts for a comprehensive multi-account AWS environment. This has lots of integration with other AWS services, such as IAM Identity Center for a single place to access multiple accounts based on role-based access control. We'll see about that in the next slides. AWS Resource Access Manager for managing resources across multiple accounts, and the Service Catalog, right, which provides blueprints and templates on common infrastructure that has that can be used. So this is known as platform operations, right? That practice of having a centralized place where an operations team will develop blueprints, templates for other teams to use, right? So Service Catalog enables that, and this is integrated with organizations. And of course, allows you to centrally manage and optimize costs. So there's an interesting feature of organizations, which is the organizational units, right? So this is a very similar concept to the Active Directory organizational units, which allows us to structure our resources using these organizational units, or OUs, right? Normally referred to OUs. So these OUs enable hierarchical layered approach to managing multiple AWS accounts. And this provides a powerful way to group and apply control centrally. So OUs are essentially clusters of AWS accounts, right? We can group accounts that share common operational requirements, security standards, or compliance needs, right? Then we can apply group controls, right? One of the primary benefits of using OUs is the ability to apply group-wide controls, whether it's specific policies, compliance checks, operational practices. This group controls allows this centralized management, right? And one thing that is important here is obviously how do we decide on the how do we decide how we want to structure our accounts, right? Or our OU implementation. So we have to think about this strategically. We don't want to always mirror our organizational structure. This might be fine in some cases, but we want to consider how and where specific controls need to be applied. For example, let's say we have different OUs for development and production environments. So each one will be tailored with controls suitable for the stage of the development of the specific product, right? So this ensures that controls that are not uniformly applied, but are also contextually relevant for the needs of each unit. So this is very important, right? You can have a structure that meets the needs of your specific use case. So to illustrate this a little bit, let's see an example how this could be structured to address different operational needs within an organization. For example, in the screen we have three OUs. The first one is workloads. So here we'll have OUs related to production and development environments. And if we organize accounts this way, we ensure that production systems are isolated from development challenges, right? So this minimizes risk and promotes stability. The second one, we have a sandbox, which is a very common OU. This could be used for innovation experimentation, right? For example, here, this sandbox accounts could be dedicated for a team or to a member, a specific person, and they will be isolated, right, to encourage testing new ideas without affecting any production workloads. And obviously, one of the good things about OUs and the controls that you can apply to them is they can have, for example, fixed expanding limits, right, for this OU, right? And in our example here, we have also the security OU, which will be focused on logs and security management, right? And this is essential. This is actually part of the foundational OUs that we get with Control Tower, and provides a centralized point for security oversight across the entire organization, right? That's the idea. Centralize all the logs and auditing in these accounts. So obviously, you can have multiple OUs. The ones that we see on the left are the foundational OUs for security and, for example, for infrastructure. And there will have accounts for shared services, the networking that we were mentioning, and obviously, depending on your use case, you will have additional OUs, right? Will be or used for workloads, individual users, exceptions, right? There's always that always happens. Someone having a specific use case, an ephemeral account, for example, or something that an account that needs to have specific security controls. This can be on the exceptions or use. So the great thing about this type of implementation is that you can start small and grow as your company needs increase, right? If you one day you can start just with the foundational OUs, and over time you can add as needed, right? That's the whole purpose of this structure. So let's talk a little bit now about identity management. First, we want to talk about a user, right? The generic description of a user, it's a person, an identity that will use a user, right? A logical user. And this logical user, we will have a set of credentials, which will allow him or her to access an AWS account, right? This is, excuse me, this is the generic description for a user. And in AWS, we have some types of users, right? The first one, the one that will start with any AWS account, is the root user, right? Which has unrestricted access to one AWS account, right? This is the super admin, the super user for any AWS account. Then we have IAM users, which are the users that you will need to create whenever a new account is created. These ones have restricted access to one AWS account. By default, they will have no permissions, so you have to give them specific permissions to them. Oh, you can always give them full access as well, but the idea behind this is to use always the least privilege principle, right? So we want to have a restricted access for any IAM user that we use. And thirdly, we have IAM identity center users, right? Which grants us restricted access to multiple AWS accounts. So that's an interesting topic that we're introducing here, right? This is one of the benefits of using this type of deployment with AWS organizations, AWS Control Tower, and IAM Identity Center, right? So about the root user, the good practices that this needs to be hardened. We'll talk a little bit later about how to harden the root user, and it should be only used when needed, right? There is a specific scenarios when the root user should be used, but mostly the root user use is discouraged. For IAM users, we don't want to create them, right? This doesn't mean that you don't need to create them in your own AWS accounts. This means when we're talking about AWS organizations, AWS Control Tower, and having this multi-account structure, you don't want to do this because this user will fall out of the scope of management, right? So you don't want to create this. And the third one is this is the regular type of user that we'll be using across multiple AWS accounts, which will allow us to have one per user and will allow us to create IAM policies that apply to these users. So putting it all together, a user can access an AWS account. This AWS account will contain all the resources and workloads, and this AWS account will be part of a OU, right? And an OU, as we've seen, will have a cluster of AWS accounts, depending on the structure they have decided. So this brings us to the next topic that we touched a little upon before, which is identity management, right? How do we manage the identities? We already know the types of users that we have, and we can manage this using this approach using IAM Identity Center. So this service simplifies how you assign and manage access for users across multiple AWS accounts and applications. IAM Identity Center is provided at no additional charge, right? As usual, you only charge for the underlying services that you will use. So one of the great things about IAM Identity Center is that it provides us centralized access management, right? Which allows us to control access to not just AWS accounts, but also customer managed applications, just like we're seeing here in the graphic. Whether it's a developer or a contractor, access is streamlined through single sign-on capabilities, enabling seamless authentications across various services, various accounts. We'll also have trusted identity propagation by integrating with IDPs, with identity providers. IAM Identity Center offers a consistent view of user identities, improving security and operational efficiency. Obviously, multi-account permissions. This is what we have mentioned before, and also access management, right? Can support variety of applications, granular controls, support, for example, access to specific applications like Redshift, RDS, and all, and obviously customer created applications. As long as they support SAML 2.0 applications, this can be done and all managed in a single service using IAM Identity Center. So when we're assigning AWS accounts to users, each group is assigned specific permission sets, right? These permission sets define what actions the user in the group can perform, which AWS resources they can access, and the policies applicable to them. These permissions are critical to ensuring that each user has the right access level for the role, enhancing both security and operational efficiency. This structure ensures that permissions are not just granular, but also well controlled and also aligned with the organization's operational needs and security policies. And they're very flexible as well, right? Just like we're seeing here in the example, users will have access to a group. Specific users may have access to multiple groups, and then we'll have permission sets applied based on the user and based on the group, right? So a user may also have permissions from multiple groups, right? That they will inherit, and this will be applied to each account. And obviously, this is all done through role assumption, right? Using IAM Identity Center for authentication. So when we're talking about root user access in this model, this is normally done when you're looking, well, that's a very small screenshot. But when you're signing in to an AWS console, you always have two options, right? You have to select the root user account, and this root user account is each and every single AWS account under this model will have its own root user account, right? So this can access, so there are, as you can see, there are multiple root users for each of these accounts. But for regular users, the access will be through IAM Identity Center, right? And we will be presented with the access to the accounts that each user will have access to. For example, in our screenshot here, in our graphic, we'll see that Mary can access the root management account and her own sandbox, as well as the security uh, that counts under the security OU. And as for John, who's a developer, he will only have access to the workload accounts and his own song. So this is an example of how granular we can get, how can we can enforce role-based access controls using IAM identity centers. But the logging is the same, right? You don't have to log into multiple accounts. You can use the same logging and use it across multiple accounts. And yeah, this is for daily use. So when we're talking about how to protect the root user, first we'll always want to set up multi-factor authentication, and this is a given. And we'll also want to set up a service control policy for disallowing actions as a root user, right? This is in case, obviously, this is an additional security measure, but maybe it's a mistake, right? It can happen. It has happened to me sometimes when you're doing management and you're using the root account. Sometimes you'll want to do other changes in the account, and this is not good, right? For especially for auditability, right? When the root user is not normally tied to a specific user, so you'll always want to enforce that actions are not allowed as a root user. So you can use this service control policy to disable this when using an AWS Control Tower and AWS organizations multi-account deployment. So now we're going to introduce AWS Control Tower, which we have been anticipating. AWS Control Tower is built on the foundational services of AWS Identity Center, AWS Organization, and AWS Service Catalog, like we had mentioned before. These integrations enable seamless management of resources, identities, and organizational policies, which form a solid base for reliable and compliant cloud operations. So, as we said, the landing zone, this is the starting point in AWS Control Tower. It provides a single organized interface for managing the AWS environment. This includes a pre-configured settings for security, identity, and compliance, which streamline the setup process for new accounts and resources. Then we'll also have, excuse me, automated account configuration using the account factory feature of AWS Control Tower, which is an abstraction built on AWS Service Catalog. AWS Control Tower automates deployment and involvement of new accounts, right? This is what is known as a vending machine approach, which simplifies the application of consistent controls and policies across accounts. We'll also have centralized governance because we're integrated with AWS organizations. This setup ensures uniform compliance and control management by using service control policies, right? We just saw an example of a service control policy before, which can be enabled for multiple use cases. And obviously, AWS Control Tower is very extensible, right? It has great flexibility to tailor your own environment as needed. You can set up directly through the AWS organizations or the AWS Control Tower console. So how does the dashboard look like? So this is an example of a dashboard we have for AWS Control Tower. In this case, we'll just have The structure is just three OUs, and under that there are 34 accounts, and we have guardrails, right? We have two types of guardrails here, which are preventative guardrails, which are organizational service control policies, and detective guardrails that rely on AWS config rules, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Um, Controls are pre-configured governance rules for security, compliance, and operations expressed in plain English to provide abstraction over granular policies. So there are three types of controls that we can have. The first one is preventive controls, which prevent policy violations through enforcement. And these are implemented using AWS CloudFormation and service control policies. The second one are detective controls, which detect policy violations and alert in the dashboard, right? And this is, as we said, this is implemented using AWS config rules. And then we'll have proactive controls, right? These are scanning resources before they are provisioned. Non-compliant resources are not provisioned, and they are implemented with CloudFormation hooks. So there are also three categories on guidance, right, for any of these controls. There are controls that are mandatory, strongly recommended, and elective controls. Mandatory controls, as the name says, they are always enforced. Strongly recommended controls are designed to enforce some common best practices for well-architected multi-account environments, but you can choose whether you want to use them or not. And elective controls enable you to track or lock down actions that are commonly restricted in an AWS enterprise environment, right? So you have those three types of controls, and you can also have additional controls that you can deploy via AWS Control Tower, Account Factory, and to design your own controls. So here are some examples of these controls. The first one is the one that we saw in the slides before, which is enabling MFA for the root user. And this is not enabled by default. However, beginning the middle of this year, there will be all the AWS accounts will force to be used MFA, right? This is coming. This is actually not going to be needed anymore, but to be enabled through AWS guardrails for Control Tower, but it will be implemented for all the accounts. So we have here some examples. For example, disallowing public read access to S3. This is a common, and this one is, for example, strongly recommended. Then enable AWS config in all available regions. This is prevented, and this is a mandatory type of control. And yeah, obviously there's also elective ones. Disallow Amazon S3 buckets that are not version enabled. Disallow delete actions, and so forth. Okay, so this brings us to the end of our talk. As we wrap today's session, let's highlight some critical points about the AWS multi-account strategy that we learned today. The first thing is a strategic grouping, right? When we're utilizing multiple AWS accounts, let's just organize our workloads not just randomly, but with clear business intent and ownership. This means our resources are aligned with our business functions, making management more intuitive and effective. We will also have enhanced security and cost management because each environment gets its own set of tailored security controls, helping us mitigate risks by containing any potential impact and simplifying the cost management process. It's about keeping things secure and under control without spreading resources too thin. We'll also have centralized control with AWS organizations. This allows us to consolidate our accounts into a single organization. We can manage everything from one place, and it gives us a bird's eye view of our operations. We'll also have seamless permission management with the integration of AWS Identity, IAM Identity Center in AWS organizations. It's all handled centrally, ensuring everyone has exactly the access they need, nothing more, nothing less. And with Control Tower, this lets us orchestrate all these capabilities, setting up a fully governed and compliant multi-account AWS structure for organization. And you can actually deploy a landing zone and get it ready for use in under an hour with Control Tower. So as we close today's discussion, if you're interested in taking the practical steps forward, Incor here to help. We offer specialized introduction landing zone deployments led by our experts using the AWS Cloud Operations Accelerator program. Following this, we can guide you through a hands-on setup workshop to ensure you're fully equipped to start building your own solutions. And with that, it's a wrap for today's session. And let's take it if there are any questions from the audience here. Okay, so I see one question. What are valid use cases for using AWS, the AWS root account? Right, that's something we did mention, but we did not say what are the use cases. Right, for example, there are some account management tasks. For example, changing account settings like the account name, the email address, the root user password, of course, and it can also be used to restore IAM user permissions if an administrator accidentally revokes their own permissions, right? That can happen. The only way to get it back is by using a root account. And also some actions in billing can only be done by the root account. So let's see if there are any other questions. Okay, can I enroll an existing AWS account or organization in a newly created AWS Control Tower deployment? Yes, you can extend AWS Control Tower governance to an individual already existing AWS account when you enroll it into an organizational unit that's already governed by AWS Control Tower. So that's totally possible. And that's a very valid use case, right? Especially for customers that may already have an AWS environment set up, but they're not using Control Tower. So this is a perfectly valid use case. Let's see if there are any other questions. Are there any automated ways to provision or update Control Tower member accounts? Yes. So I assume by this it means, for example, using infrastructure scope, right? You can. I think the most efficient way to do it is through Terraform, right? With the AWS Control Tower account factory for Terraform, that's an actual feature of Control Tower, which uses a GitOps model, right, for automating account provisioning updates. And obviously, you can also use Lambda to provide appropriate IAM roles for AWS Control Tower landing zone management account, and you can use also account factory customizations, right? This was something we mentioned in our talk, which is a blueprint in the AWS Service Catalog, right? And uses underneath it uses AWS CloudFormation for provisioning. So yeah, that's the automated way of managing AWS Control Tower member accounts. So, do we have any more questions? I think we're done with no more questions. Thank you, everyone, and you can visit www.incor.com for additional insights on this. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed today's session.